Good morning. Today's video commemorates the Galwan killings. It is a remembrance for the brave soldiers who laid down their life 3 years ago on the 15th of June 2020 in eastern Ladakh. Today is the third anniversary. I believe that this date, 15th June 2020, will go down in the military history of India as a landmark thing for two reasons. One, for the event itself, what happened there, and two, the outcome of the event or how India's political leadership and military leadership reacted to that. Both are very important. Let me start with the first one. Details are not known even today because there is a sort of a formal blanket put on the details. Nobody wants to talk about it, and yet truth always seeps out in small bits and parts. So what we do know is that there was a tent, a couple of tents maybe, which the Indian side felt that the Chinese had pitched on their side, on the Indian side, and they had to be removed. So everything started at a very low level, at a tactical level. So perhaps a party of 16 Bihar Indian unit, which was somewhere close by or who had the responsibility for the area, it was sent there to talk to the Chinese and get the tents removed, and the Chinese were adamant that they won't remove it. Why? We don't know the inside story. But what we do know is that somebody in the Indian Army was determined, higher up obviously, was determined that these tents have to be removed and they will be removed. And therefore, at some stage, when a build-up happened of 16 Bihar, and the commanding officer himself, Colonel Santosh Babu, was perhaps told by somebody that he has to now lead the charge. The Chinese soldiers, the PLA, they were prepared for this. They were expecting this. They were prepared with the most unconventional weapon in this day and age. They were prepared with stones, they were prepared with serrated rods, and they had all sort of things except firearms, which were not used. And what followed was perhaps a few hours of build-up and a fight that happened. And in that fight, as I said, the Chinese were prepared, far better prepared. And the Indian side didn't seem to be prepared. They were only fighting on bravery and raw courage, which the Indian soldier always has demonstrated he has in ample measures. In fact, I remember asking the army chief, Naravane, after the event, that why weren't our soldiers given the firearms? And he said, well, they had the firearms, but they didn't use it. I mean, it doesn't sound plausible at all. But so be it. The Chinese also did not want to use the firearms. And at the end, what has come out is Indian side says that 20 lives were lost, including of the commanding officer. We don't know how many were injured. 10 Indian soldiers, including 4 officers, were taken prisoner of war. The Chinese later admitted that 4 of their men had died, but it is absolutely certain that the Indian side did not take any PW, prisoner of war, of the PLA. It did not happen. The long and short of the story is that since that time, as part of their PSYOPs, the PLA keeps putting out the videos of that horrendous night, what happened that night, on social media. One of them was put out very recently. Now the Indian side is not doing any such thing. I'm not sure even if they have the videos or any video was made, because perhaps this side was not prepared at all. But the details should come out. Why they should come out is because it needs to be known who was that person in the army hierarchy, and because there are a lot of rumors that it was perhaps the then CDS Bipin Rawat who wanted these tents to be removed. We don't know. But as far as the BJP government remains in power, obviously it will not come out, for the simple reason I come to the second part, which is the outcome. So much was the government shaken up by the events of that night. The night when we saw the threshold of grey zone operation, when no shot was fired, when it was very clear that the Chinese did not want war at all. Something that should have been clear to anybody, but it was not clear to the Indian thinkers, the Indian policy makers, that these guys don't want war. So much shocked, petrified, horrified was the Indian side that the Prime Minister himself, 4 days later of the event on 19th of June, told a completely surprised nation, and more surprised was the enemy, that nobody has come in our territory, nobody is sitting on our territory. I mean, these are profound words. Generations will remember this. And just think of the glee, the happiness the Chinese would have got hearing this. Why? Because here is the leadership. Without a shot being fired, when we are still in the grey zone operation, has actually thrown in the towel that we don't want to fight. The war was over at that time, which meant that as far as the Chinese were concerned, now they could have their terms on the table when the negotiations happened. It was very clear to them, and they got their way. Now, how they got their way is that immediately after that, the Indians died with the help of the Russians. With the Chinese, the negotiations started. And eventually on 10th of September 2020, a joint statement was signed by the two foreign ministers, Foreign Minister of India, Foreign Minister of China, in Moscow, in the presence of the Russian Foreign Minister, under the umbrella of what we call RIC, Russia, India, China. It was signed. And anybody who reads the 5 points of the joint statement knows it is heavily loaded in favor of China. Now, that is one part. The other part is that obviously the army was horrified. Army was not happy by whoever gave the instructions to them on that night, whether they took the arms, why they did not fire. I mean, there are so many questions. Perhaps a national commission is required for this, if when another government at the center comes in office. But it was clear to Naravne, the army chief, that look, the soldiers' credibility has taken a big knock. So what the army did was, on the night of 29th, 30th August 2020, in a daring operation, our boys, they went and occupied South Pangong, so the entire Kailash range, which overlooked the PLA garrisons. We know all this because at that time, the army commander, General Joshi, he has said in one of the YouTubes that I was asked by my chief that we need to do something. And they did it. So this we know, it was said by Naravne. And I think Naravne at least restored the morale of the Indian army. But the problem is, army cannot do much. The government again came under pressure of the Chinese that the Indian army has to vacate the Kailash range. So that whole process started. We had, after this very sort of loaded or unfavorable joint statement was signed, next year on 7th of February 2021, former army chief V.K. Singh, who is a minister in the Modi government, he made a shocking statement in Chennai, and he said that for all these years, the Indian army has been doing 10 times more transitions than the PLA. I checked up with the chief of staff of the Eastern Command, and he looked at me and he said very straight to me, with honesty. He said, sir, we don't claim any territory on their side. Why should we go and do the transgressions there? They are the ones who claim the territory here, so they do it repeatedly. We have been holding the line which we were told to hold after the 1993 agreement, which is the agreement on peace and tranquility, and we have been holding it. Well, so be it. General V.K. Singh declared this, and after that, the government said, all right, now we will vacate this range, and the range was vacated in February. And I think this must have been one of the reasons that Naravne wasn't considered to be the Chief of Defence Staff. Because he took an extra initiative without perhaps checking with the government. It is so obvious. Now, the point is, didn't stop here. Everybody in the government has been saying that nobody has come in our territory, and the last, now recent to join the list, is the External Affairs Minister himself, Jai Shankar. Jai Shankar talking about the 9 years achievements of foreign policy of the Modi government. He says that what the Chinese have done is forward deployment and not a land grab. Hello, what's going on? If a forward deployment is permanent, it's occupation. And occupation is land grab. So this is just a play on words, nothing more than that. So we stand there. As far as the Chinese are concerned, they are very clear that if in the grey zone operations, the Indians can't fight, as far as the government is concerned, they do not have the gumption to get into a hot war. Now, let's consider the military leadership. What have they done? Now here I'm making a clear distinction between our determined, our brave soldiers and our top leadership of the Indian Army. I'm talking Indian Army because it has to do with it's a land problem. Now, very recently we had the Shangri-La dialogue. It's a high-level dialogue which is held, which was held in Singapore, and there the Chinese delegation, the PLA delegation, which was headed by Senior Colonel Chow, he said when he was asked, or perhaps he himself volunteered, saying that as far as the land border is concerned with India, the Indian military is not prepared and we don't see any threat from them, and he gave two reasons for that. The first reason is said that they do not have the modernization compared to our modernization, and they do not have manufacturing, defense manufacturing compared to our defense manufacturing, and I agree entirely with him. Now, why we don't have modernization? Let's start from there. I mean, after all, it has been 3 years since Galwan happened. Why is it that the PLA feels that the Indian military is not ready for war? Because they aren't ready for war. Now, everybody tells me that you talk of artificial intelligence, you talk of future, leave artificial intelligence aside. Let's not even talk about that. Let's understand the modernization specifically being done by the PLA and by the Indian Army. In very simple terms, the PLA modernization means that creation of 3 new war domains, period. And this is not futuristic. This they accomplished in 2010. 2010, I repeat. And which are these 3 domains? They are cyber domain, electromagnetic spectrum, which is electronic fires, and the third one is space, where the space is no longer militarized, it is weaponized. That means the actual weapons of war, it's a war domain. Chinese had created the capability, the technical know-how they had, that they felt that they could, and the Americans concede that, the US military. In 2010, they had a capability to compete, confront, combat in 3 new domains of war. This is the reason why the US military in 2014, for 3 years at the Pentagon, people were thinking how to now offset the advantages of the PLA. And they finally in 2014 came up with the offset strategy, which is called the third offset strategy, that now perhaps we can only score over the PLA will be if we now get into the areas of artificial intelligence and autonomy, but this is a different subject. I'm not even going this way. So they have the expertise. This is their modernization. Please understand. Now let me immediately compare it with the modernization of the Indian Army. Just a month ago, the Indian Army Chief, General Pandey, he gave out to one of the YouTube channel his 4 priorities, what he called the transformation of the Indian Army. His first priority is right sizing the army. That means restructuring of the army for an optimized teeth to tail ratio. How long will you keep doing this right sizing? On the one hand, you talk of right sizing, on the other hand, you keep raising the army units. Okay. His second priority, he said, is modernization and technology infusion. Didn't explain what it was, but it is very obvious what it was. And the third, he says, equally important, on which he was very keen to deliberate further and talk further, he said, was human resources and especially Agnivir. And the fourth, he said, is jointness and integration. Now, what are we talking about? We are talking about 6 domains of the Chinese army. That means Chinese have the capability today to compete with the US military, forget the Indian army and the military. They can compete and fight in 6 war domains of land, air, sea, cyber, electromagnetic spectrum, and space. 6 versus 3, which is land, air, and sea. Nothing more than that. Please tell me who wins. I mean, it's simple logic. The first thing that should strike the Indian military leadership, the CDS, the new CDS which they have put there, whom they have put there, is that, first of all, how do I take on the 3 additional war domains of China? And the problem with those war domains is that there the war will be fought at the speed of light. Cyber war, electronic war, speed of light. Speed of light, the war will be fought, and it will have nothing to do with the climatic conditions. It will have nothing to do with your inclement weather, with your acclimatization, with your bad weather, all the things that the lead service of the Indian military, the Indian army, will have to bear in mind. Now, what they did after that, after 2010, once they created these 3 virtual domains, and mind you, anybody who understands these 3 domains also understands that they will first fight in these 3 domains and end up with the outcome where they will, if not completely disable, they will choke the communications of the enemy. If you cannot communicate, you cannot fight. So these are those fundamental key domains in which we have really no capabilities. People tell me that, look, we have capability, we have agencies under the Integrated Defense Headquarters. When the fight is at the speed of light, it is always attack, attack, attack. There is nothing called defense, because attack itself is defense. When you are looking at these sort of speeds you are looking at of war. So what did they do? The Chinese, the PLA. Once they got these 3, now they said, all right, now we are prepared to do the restructuring of the PLA, which they started after deliberations of 3 years. Xi Jinping became the General Secretary and head of the Central Military Commission simultaneously in November 2012. And the reform started in 2015. And those reforms were wholesome. Unlike the reforms by the Indian Army, where one day Bipin Rawat becomes the CDS in January 2020, and they say, and he declares, in 3 years I will have jointness. And now, of course, he is no more. The new man says, the man who has come in his shoes, he says, now I will do a bottoms up. That means the real joint operations will be the last thing to do. Why couldn't you think it earlier? Why can't the Indian military leadership plan all these things? Now, what the PLA did? In 2015, they started the reforms and they said that the reforms will be accomplished in 5 years, that is 2020. Now, what did they do as part of the reforms? This is very interesting. We need to understand this part. The virtual domains of cyber, which are the key things? Cyber, electronic warfare, counter space capabilities. They put under one organization called the Strategic Support Force. And what is their big strength? Which is the huge inventory of missiles of all types. They created another big structure called Rocket Force. And both the Strategic Support Force and the Rocket Force, they brought directly under the Central Military Commission through the joint headquarters called the Joint Staff Department. Why can't our 3 service chiefs and the CDS think about this? This is where the problem is, and this is what you have to counter. Your Agniveers will not help in war. All this downsizing, right sizing will not help you at all. So, they created that. Then they said, all right, against India, we will create a command only for India, which is the Western Theatre Command. It has no other role, only India. And they've been practicing there for the last 3 years. Now in the Western Theatre Command, again they created the Tibet Military Command, which is for the Tibet region, and they created the Xinjiang Military Division, where in the Xinjiang, which is Ladakh, they will fight the campaign alongside a combined operations with the Pakistan military, with whom they've been training for the last 10 years. Now this is the setting. I mean, I'm surprised that the army chief is talking of and giving out these sort of his modernization priorities, and he calls them transformational. Now, why I'm saying all these things is because it is disturbing. Because once again, the leadership is not taking the responsibility, and they are actually putting the burden on the brave soldier and expecting that he'll just hold the line and that is all that is required. The lines will not be held at all. I think I've explained this in my earlier videos also, how the campaign will be fought. In other words, as far as the modernization is concerned, Senior Colonel Zhu was absolutely right that they are nowhere near a modernization. Let's now see the other thing that he said, which is about defense manufacturing. Defense manufacturing is about capacities. Do you have the wherewithal for a war spurt? Now what this means is, irrespective of the complexion of war, whether it is a long war, it is a short war, the side which does not have a vibrant defense industrial complex cannot win the war. And India does not have it today. Why it will not win the war is that, first of all, how the war will go will be determined by the side which has better modernization, in this case the PLA, because they will see what are their war objectives and how they are to accomplish those war objectives. And assuming, hypothetically speaking, if the Indian side says, all right, we have to prepare for a short war and it becomes an elongated war. I mean, they keep giving the example of the Ukraine war, absolutely wrong example, but that is not something I will discuss here. So the point is, even in a short war, there will be a constraint at how much ammunition you expend. Do you fire normal rates? Do you fire intense rates? What sort of rates do you fire? Now the problem is that in the last 9 years of Modi government, and this is no secret, we've had first Make in India, now we have this Atmanirbhar in defense, and SIPRI, which is one of the respected magazines which does a yearly job based in Sweden. They have just come out with their latest edition where they say that India is the biggest arms importer in the world. We import maximum arms in the world. Not now, all these 9 years we have imported maximum arms in the world. So what about that Atmanirbhar and Make in India? See, the problem is that three key things are missing. To make a vibrant defense industry, you need an investment in research and development. And the fruits don't come tomorrow or yesterday. There is a long gestation period. So you have to have patience for that. Now please, anybody can go and check what sort of money we put in the research and development. Nothing. Now, second thing is you need world-class management. We don't have, for the simple reason that the entire defense industrial complex is under the government of India, the Ministry of Defense. And obviously for a bureaucrat, export is not the biggest thing that he is looking at, which is the litmus test of how your industry is doing. He is not looking at that. So where are the best management practices? And the third is, once you have the best management practices, what the Chinese have done, civil military fusion is required. Then you fuse the two, and especially at a time when we are talking about the emerging technologies that are coming in. In other words, on this third anniversary, we have to, it doesn't matter whether what I say is ignored, but here is the truth. The Chinese are completely conscious of two facts, that A, the Modi government will not go to war. It perhaps does not have the courage to go to war. And B, the Indian military is preparing for an absolutely wrong war. And we have just put the entire burden on the soldier and nothing else. Thank you.